So this is our video facilitation guide for the activity on target. What we're looking at here is a miniature version of the activity. So what we'll do is we will talk about the setup of it, we'll walk through the expectations, the goals, and what's supposed to happen. We'll cover all the rules, and then we'll do all the interpretations and layers of facilitation that allow you to lead the activity successfully. This is set up as what's called a 4-team on target. You can have on target set up for 3 teams, 5 teams, 8 teams. This is a classic 4-team setup, but the setup of it's very important. The physical setup of it is key to understand. The group's going to be divided into 4 teams. Each team is going to have a side to the that they're going to represent on, and at that side there should be a pile of colored tennis balls, all of the same color. In this case, we've got orange, purple, green, and blue. In the middle are the containers within which they need to get the tennis balls. What's most important about the setup is that for whatever side a team is representing on, that bucket needs to be on the opposite side within the middle. So as you can see, I'm standing by the green tennis balls, and the green bucket is furthest away from me on a side, my side of the setup, but the farthest opposite of the way this is set up too. For purple as well, here's the purple team, but the purple bucket is over here, orange is here, orange is furthest away, blue as well. You don't want to have them so that the green is there or here. It needs to be on the exact opposite. Underneath each bucket is a colored mat, and that mat matches the color of the bucket. We'll talk more about the use of those later on in the activity. Again, the setup is key. It's important if you're setting up the activity and dumping tennis balls that you remember that they go on the bucket goes on the opposite side. This is a condensed version. It's going to be a little bit bigger in the actual setup, enough so that there could be a person, you'll see, potentially kneeling behind each bucket. So these obviously need more room in the middle. And the distance between the closest bucket to a side, which is not the team's colored bucket, but for measurement, is such that a team could not just reach over and drop them in. So this distance here, you're potentially doubling. It's going to be a little bit bigger. For different size on targets, whether it's a 5-team, an 8-team, etc., the shape also changes to match the number of sides. For this exercise, we're going to focus on the 4-team. So this is the equipment that you need. The other piece that's really important is you'll have an easel with flip chart paper and a scoring sheet. And the scoring sheet is important because it's a key piece in monitoring and also reinforcing some of the rules of the activity. So as is the case in most experiential activities, you'll gather your group, you'll divide them into the teams that you want, and then you'll read them the instructions. It's very important that you read the instructions as they are. There's a little bit of annotation or kind of additional commentary that you'll offer. Other than that, that's all you're going to do, and then the activity begins with you handing them a copy of the instructions. The team's objectives, before I give you the actual instructions to read them, what's supposed to happen, what you hope happens, or what you set them up for, is attempting to score as many points as possible, and to score that over the course of a period or a series of rounds. So teams are throwing balls into buckets. Every time a ball stays in a bucket, the right colored bucket, they get a point for it. There's all kinds of criteria for where and how and when that happens. That's what we'll cover in this video. However, that's the ultimate essence of what you're looking for. We hope that over time, teams are improving, obviously. And this is set up to be very nuanced and vague between whether they are 1, 2, 3, 4 teams working as independent functioning units, potentially competing against each other, or whether they are one giant team as well. So that's something that we'll talk about as the activity progresses. That's the essence of what is physically happening in the activity. Throwing, missing, retrieving, balls laying in the bucket, scorekeeping, timed rounds, planning, practicing, etc. Teams are at their locations. Here are the instructions. Your project task is to work as a team to earn as many points as possible in 90 seconds. After you read that, point to the flip chart and remind them there's going to be 4 90-second rounds. In between each round, you have approximately 2 or 3 minutes of planning, practicing, strategizing. The time between rounds is up to you as the facilitator to decide how much you give them, depending on their progress. But generally, it's 2 to 3 minutes in between, 90-second round, 4 rounds over time. Project requirements, and there are 7 of them. Number 1, buckets and lines cannot be moved. So as a facilitator, we know that whatever's not said is up for interpretation and stretching where it's possible to do or not do things. Buckets, obviously those are the buckets. The line is whatever is the element that you're using to mark the boundary. Here we've used rope to do that. You might be using tape. Whatever it is, buckets and lines cannot be moved, which means balls and potentially even the mats are up for movement. Number 2, balls must be thrown into matching buckets from behind the line. You earn 1 point for every ball that is in the right bucket. As the facilitator at that point, I like to clarify exactly what that means. And I will say, if you're on the green team and a green ball ends up in a green bucket, it is worth 1 point. However, a green ball in a purple, orange, or blue bucket is worth 0 points. This is one of the rules that we'll come back to because there's a lot of interpretation to it as well. Number 3, each ball must bounce at least 1 time before coming to rest in the bucket. At that point, there's typically an audible groan from the audience as they realize this activity is instantly becoming much harder than they thought. Because up until that point, the assumption is, yes, that bucket is further away, but I will throw and it will go in, and now they're hearing the word bounce, and this activity is often being done on uneven terrain, including grass, and the perceived challenge becomes much higher. Number 4, each team will decide the ratio that it wants of ball throwers and runners. There's nothing else to say about that because the next 2 rules describe those roles. Rule number 5, balls can only be thrown into buckets by a thrower. Throwers must be standing behind the line. Again, like an earlier rule with the bouncing, you'll see there's some interpretation there, but in essence that means whoever's going to be throwing is here, or here, there, or there, and they're throwing the balls into the buckets they're trying to get the balls into. Number 6, loose balls, which means a ball that misses the bucket or goes in the wrong bucket. Loose balls can only be retrieved by runners. Runners can be anywhere. However, they may not use any muscular movements to help put a ball in a bucket. That's a bit of a funky statement, and it instantly causes groups to consider what officially is muscular movements. We'll open all that up for explanation as we go through this video again. And rule number 7, balls can be recycled after all the balls are in all the buckets. And then it says here in small letters, which is important to read, if rule number 7 is met, then the bucket may be moved to recycle the balls, but it must be returned to its original location. So that's the one time that if rule number 7 is met, if all the balls are in all the buckets, then the green team could pick up their bucket, bring it over here, dump it out, and then it has to go back to its original location, which is right over there. Anytime a team is recycling and meeting rule number 7 because they've done that, then that's the one time that the rule about buckets being moved, not being moved, can be, there's the exception there. So that's the setup of the activity. Once you've finished rule number 7, you want to then invite somebody from each team to come over to receive a copy. There's enough for everyone. They take that copy and you announce that their first planning period begins now. For the first round, 2 minutes is plenty of time. They can plan, they can practice, they can strategize. They can do whatever they want during that time. It's your job then to step back and let them work. During the planning time, teams will huddle up, they'll read the rules, they'll begin to look at places for interpretation. They may start to practice, and that often involves trying to bounce the ball, as rule number 3 states, off the ground into a bucket. And as you'll see, some of that is, again, nuanced, but that's what the practicing will have in store. So let's just talk about quickly kind of how you progress through the rounds, then we'll go back and look at all the things that are going to happen. So as you get ready to start, you'll say, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin round 1, time is up. It's important that you make sure that there are no balls in the buckets to begin with, and then you start round 1. You run round 1 for exactly 90 seconds. When time is up, teams will huddle up, they will count up their score, and you will ask for one representative from each team to come meet you here, and they will tell you their team color and their number. Blue 7, orange 15, and you will write that number in their appropriate scoring box. When all the teams have reported, you will then calculate a team total. While that's happening, people are brainstorming already for the next round, they're talking. It's up to you to gather everyone's attention direct them to the flip chart and say, congratulations, here are your results for round 1. That's all you say. Then you say your goal for round 2 is to at least double your team total from round 1. You don't reference individual scores. You don't point particularly to here. We're leaving this activity open for teams to figure out for themselves the layers of individual contribution and competitiveness and what it means to collaborate collectively, because that is where this activity takes them. After you announce the doubling, it may be that the score, the team total is 12, the team total could be 60. It doesn't matter what it is, and you don't announce what's in this box. You just say, here are your results, congratulations. Your goal for round 2 is to at least double your team total from round 1. Continue. They go back to planning and practicing. Round 2 continues. As before, 90 seconds, they report out again. Hopefully there's improvement, there may or may not be. And then you get to round 3. In between round 2 and 3, the announcement of the scoring changes a little bit. We're going to push them. But before we get to that, because that gets into the kind of advanced layers of the facilitation limit, we have to now go back and look at all the ways that the activity progresses in terms of rule interpretation. So we'll take it rule by rule. And all of this is going to intersect, so you have to be prepared to watch for a lot and just trust that if it's not explicit, then there's room for interpretation. So let's start with rule number 2. Balls must be thrown in matching buckets from behind the line. You earn 1 point for every ball that's in the right bucket. This is set up for teams to be the furthest distance they can be from their bucket. Buckets and lines cannot be moved, but nothing says that you can't move the tennis balls or yourselves. So one of the earliest and most common reinterpretations of the rules is to reallocate resources and teams to the side closest to their bucket. So the green team will pick up the tennis balls and they will actually move over here. And now they can throw right here. In the first round, they're highly competitive, so there's a good chance that each team is solving that themselves. Some teams will move over there before the time begins. Some teams will wait until you say go, and then they will run over there to do that. There's nothing in the rules that says they can't move before any round begins. So if they decide to wait, that's their decision. They're wasting time during their 90 seconds to get over there. They can move before that. Some teams will believe they cannot change physical location, so they will actually take their balls and pass them over to the other team. And that team will throw for them, and they will throw for that. The other team, that works. It's not the most efficient way, and as you can see, there's better ways to do it. But in essence, if a team moves their bodies around this space, completely fine, anywhere they want to go. If a team reallocates tennis balls, completely fine, anywhere they want to go with the tennis ball. Rule number 3, each tennis ball must bounce at least 1 time before coming to rest in the bucket. The language of that is incredibly intentional and very important to understand. Each ball must bounce at least 1 time before coming to rest in the bucket. It doesn't say what the ball has to bounce off of, and it doesn't say that the ball has to bounce before going into the bucket. It says before coming to rest in the bucket. So obviously, if you bounce the ball off the ground and you're the green team, that is a bounce, and it meets the requirements. The ball must bounce before coming to rest in the bucket. But there's nothing that says that this also is illegal. This is legal. You could do this. You could bounce it, catch it, and then throw it in. That ball just bounced before coming to rest in the bucket. There's also nothing that says that you couldn't take the ball, throw it off the inside of the bucket, and then have it come to rest. So I could throw it like that. It bounces off the side of the bucket and then comes to rest. Each ball must bounce at least once before coming to rest in the bucket. All of those interpretations, all of those, the ways that people are throwing the ball are completely fair and meet that requirement. So it's very important as a facilitator, and this applies to the whole activity, that we don't get caught up trying to catch all the rule violations, because in reality, there's very few rule violations. And even if they are happening, our job is to catch them at the scoring time, not during the 90 seconds. So anything like that is completely legal. Rule number 4, 5, and 6 are about the two roles, runners and throwers. Balls have to be thrown by throwers. Throwers are behind the line. Again, now we know, well, what line? It doesn't matter what line. So I'm here, but I could be on this side throwing, and that still counts. I'm behind the line. But any ball that is in the middle or that goes around has to be retrieved by a runner. Runners can be anywhere, so that creates an opportunity for somebody to be inside here. They cannot be a thrower. If they're in the middle, they are a runner. However, runners may not use any muscular movement to help put a ball in a bucket. So that means that if a ball misses, a runner could get it and give it back to their team. But they may not throw the ball in the bucket because throwers must be behind the line. There's nothing that says, though, that a runner could not be some kind of human backboard for a bucket. So for example, if the orange team has reallocated their tennis balls over here, then I could technically take a knee or two knees and be a backboard for this. Buckets can't be moved, so I cannot tilt the bucket, lean on its side, I cannot pick it up, but I could sit here like this, and in fact, 2 or 3 of us could, and we could form a human backboard so that when the balls are thrown, they hit us and go in. The key there is that there cannot be any muscular movement. So if I am a human backboard, I must stay still. I cannot move my shoulders, I cannot move my hands, I cannot do any movement that helps put a ball in a bucket. That would be muscular movement, and that would make those tennis balls that go in invalid in terms of scoring. And if a ball still misses, a runner can throw it back. So they can actually do 2 things at once. They could be a backboard, and they could throw things back. Now at this point, it's important to note that there's nothing in the rules that talks about resources. So there are resources in this activity that a team member or a team may decide to utilize, and there's nothing that says you can't use them. So for example, there often is flip chart paper. There are easels. There are these spots on the ground that are used to mark the location of the bucket, but nothing said you can't use them or move them. So you could have somebody pick them up and decide to hold it just like that. And that creates a wonderful backboard, except that you can't use muscular movement. So once you hold it, that runner must stay still. So what happens in the activity between the ball bouncing rule and the interpretation of where you stand and muscular movement, between those 3 elements, is there's a lot of room for creativity and interpretation. And some teams may solve for one of it, but not the other. So teams may create backboards, but still be bouncing the ball off the ground to get it in there, which is very inefficient. Some teams may figure out just throw it, but not be using backboards, and the balls are missing, etc. Ideally, all of that combines into a very innovative solution that challenges the process and creates an opportunity for teams to be very creative and figure things out. So resources we can use, bouncing we've talked about, as well as the muscular movement. That, once you understand that that's what can be done, again, your job as a facilitator is to remain true to the letter of the law of the rules, and then allow for as much creativity as possible. And these are some things that you can see that will happen. So there's nothing that says that you have to bounce 1 ball at a time or throw 1 ball at a time. So I've seen teams that might kind of bounce a bunch and then throw them all in. So this bouncing we know is not the most efficient, but it's still very creative. And then they're throwing 3 or 4 at a time. In terms of resources, there's flip chart paper. We've seen teams who take the flip chart paper and hold it up at an angle into a funnel. And then those 2 people holding it stay still. All the balls go in, the bucket comes back, it gets caught by a team member over here with the balls, it goes back in again, recycle, etc. There are teams who will take paper, shirts, backpacks, etc., and they will place all of their tennis balls inside a bag to create kind of one giant ball, tie it up, zip it up, tape it up, and they will throw that, and by definition, all the balls inside that item all bounce off each other, technically, and so that would count as a bounce as well. And now we've gone from 60 balls to 4, and you're throwing and retrieving, and throwing and retrieving. What gets interesting and complicated is the last rule around recycling. The recycling rule says that balls can be recycled after all the balls are in all the buckets. It's very important that we understand exactly the language there, because it says all the balls in all the buckets. It's not your job to emphasize that, it's their job to figure it out. Because typically they will get all their balls in and then recycle. But recycling can't happen until all the balls are in all the buckets, which means every single tennis ball has to end up in a bucket, hopefully the right bucket, because it won't count for points otherwise. And then the teams could take their buckets, dump them out, and recycle. So this is important for innovation, but it's also important for process and scoring, because what will happen in the first round, inevitably, is one team will finish their set of balls sooner than somebody else. And more likely than not, they did not read rule number 7 thoroughly, and they will begin to recycle. Now, we talked about not intervening during the rounds, but it's your job to help these teams also make sure they're reading the instructions. So if that happens during round 1, typically what we recommend is for you to walk by and just remind them, don't stop the activity, before you recycle, please check rule number 7. Often they will not listen to you, and that is their prerogative. But if they do, they might read it again, they might figure it out. If they don't, they will figure it out when it comes to scoring. Because what happens is this, round 1 is over, most likely a team has recycled. Each team should have approximately 15 tennis balls. Blue will say 6, orange will say 9, purple will say 12, green will say 27. And you will say to them exactly this, how many tennis balls do you actually have? And they will say, we have 15. And you will say, I'm sorry, I can only count 15. Please check rule number 7. And then you will write 15 right here. They will go back, they will read the rules. More likely than not, they will understand they misinterpreted the rule, and thus begins a conversation about individual team competition versus collectiveness and the collaborative aspect of competing together against the clock and the score. Because if they continue to do that each round, they will never be able to score more than the 15 balls that are in there. And each time they recycle, they need to recycle together. So it's not recycle the first time and then just do whatever you want. It's get them all in, get them out. Get them all in until everyone has them in the second time, get them out. So this recycling rule lives throughout the rounds and forces teams to, they must finish getting all the balls in together, and that promotes all these layers of collaboration. So those are the interpretations that are the kind of foundational ones to understand. On top of that then begins a bunch of trajectories that teams go in, and that's important to know what to look for. Remember, as a facilitator though, your job is to read the rules, manage the time, not get into interpretation, debate, or discussion, enforce the recycling rule in between the rounds. At the end of the activity, there's plenty of time to discuss the spirit of the game, some of the ethics, the assumptions people made, was that legal or not? There's only a couple of things that you have to enforce. Time, right? And basically recycling. Those are the two things that are the primary things you're watching out for. Everything else you can, gentle reminders, and you can catch them at the end as well, at the end of each round. So we're back to round 1. Teams start typically highly competitive. So much so that some teams will actually work to undermine each other. And there are teams that will block other people's tennis balls. There are teams that will sit on each other's buckets, dump each other's buckets out, hide tennis balls out of the way, all in the spirit of winning, but with the assumption that all 4 teams are trying to compete against each other. That effort quickly gets redirected when teams realize they're collaborating, but the mindset is usually often how people start. Teams will come at their understanding of the rules quicker or slower than others. Some teams may become very innovative and figure out some of these ways to reinterpret the rules. Some will not. But it's up to them to figure out if they will pass that information on. Teams may come to you with questions. Generally speaking, it's better to answer less than more, as we were talking about. So I often will make a rule that at the outset, everything you have to succeed is either on the rule sheet or within your ingenuity. There are no questions you can ask the facilitator. And that way they turn towards each other and they start to solve. Somewhere between round 1 and 3, teams will typically figure out that they're collaborating, and then they will start to work on systems to achieve that. They will help each other. So if a runner sees an orange runner sees a purple ball, they'll pass it back to the purple side. Runners will move around here and pass balls this way. Throwers will join other teams because no one says you need to stay on your same functional group. Throwers will join teams if a team is slower and try to help them put the balls in the buckets. Teams will share information and best practices and ideas and try to get to the same point because they're realizing if we don't all sync up on the same strategy, then we cannot execute effectively together if one team is constantly in a different place in terms of how they want to execute the activity. So that progresses through the competition to the collaboration piece. We talked about some of the innovations that happen. Again, if you're not sure, go back to the rules. If it looks like it meets the rules, don't get involved. It's up to the group to have a fantastic discussion afterwards of whether that really is legitimate or not, and those conversations are very rich for teams to talk about. The way we run the activity is that after round 1, you double the score. After round 2, you make a different announcement, whether they have doubled the score or not. You announce that, first of all, congratulations, very successful, and you announce you have some new information for them, that if they want to consider this their product or their service, in order to be competitive in the market, not world class, just competitive, they need to be scoring X. And X is a number that is typically triple or quadruple what they were achieving in round 2. So for a team of 4, they're typically going to be scoring somewhere under 60 here. They might be around 120, 130 here on a good day. But so over here, round 3 is probably going to be in the realm of 500. Something that shocks the system, that makes them take a step back and realize even doubling won't be enough. We need to triple, quadruple our score, and what's it going to take to get there? Because often, teams have not solved for some of the fundamental efficiency issues. They've not solved for the bouncing. They've not solved for where teams stand. They've not solved for backboards and quick recycling and syncing up their recycling together. And so this forces them to do that. For 8 teams, we're typically in the range of 750 to 800, sometimes even 1,000. The number needs to cause a bit of a disconnect between how they're doing and realizing that what they're doing is nowhere near enough. And you will see the collaboration amplifies. To support that process, we give them more time to plan between round 2 and round 3. So between round 1 and round 2, there's usually, before round 1, there's a few minutes. Between round 1 and round 2, there's again a few minutes. Between round 3 and 4, you're typically more in the 4 to 5 minute range. And you don't have to announce exactly how much time, but they need to be able to have time to start to push through some of the breakthrough thinking that has to happen and to organize themselves, because they may decide to come together and talk, they may break up and prototype and then come back and share, but we want to allow them some time to push the innovation and the creative and the team building process as well. Then you run round 3, they may actually get very close, they often will not. They might just work harder and not smarter, they might have some breakthrough thinking but not enough. They might have the breakthrough they need, like putting the balls in shirts, for example, and tying them up, but their execution is very poor. So they will need to continue to work between round 3 and 4. But the breakthrough scoring is the breakthrough goal is between round 2 and 3. That 500, 750, 1,000. So for round 4, when you finish round 3, you see their team total, and then you announce that in order to remain competitive, of course, their competition continues to innovate. So whatever the score is, you typically add about 50 points to it. So if you said the goal was 50, you say, well, if you want to be competitive, you know your competition is continuing to stretch themselves too, you need to be scoring at least 550. If they achieve the threshold goal, then you can raise it even more. Do not double it again necessarily, but continue to push them further and further towards more and more breakthrough thinking. And we do that because high goals produce better team development, high goals push for innovation, and high goals also begin to challenge people's thinking about, well, what really is the spirit of the game and what is legal or not? Because in every environment, even the most mitigated and kind of rule-abiding industries, there's a point where the laws become unclear and is this legit or not? And it produces a very robust conversation during the debrief as well. So play round 1, double the score. Play round 2, amp up the goal dramatically. Play round 3, depending on where they're at, either hold the goal if they're not close, or add 50 to it so that it continues to be the stretch and the challenge that they need. That's the essence of the delivery of the activity. There are some safety things to keep in mind. It's very hectic. There can be 5, 10, 15 people in the middle moving, running, balls moving in different directions. It's very important that you're monitoring for people in terms of how hard they're throwing the ball, where they're throwing it, how competitive and aggressive they're getting, and that they're not stepping on each other's fingers or toes. Announce that at the beginning and or monitor it as you work. As a facilitator, it's okay for you to walk around and visit the groups and potentially even walk in the middle just to keep an eye on how things are going and see how the people in the middle are doing as well. People are potentially throwing tennis balls at each other at some potentially more vulnerable areas of the body. So it's important that people protect themselves and stand in a role or in a position that is comfortable for them. They could be throwers, they could be runners. If you need to have chairs as well for people to sit on, that can work also. At the end of the activity, there's either going to be a very big celebration for the scoring or some disappointment about getting close and not achieving their goal. You'll know you've succeeded when you spent very little time interacting with the groups except for the scoring, and then allowing them to then unpack and explore the layers of whether they think they've succeeded or not. There are the rare occasions where teams are unable to make the shift from competition to collaboration, and they remain in competitive mode either most of or the entire activity, and it can become very aggressive. And so keep an eye out for teams that do that. There have been very rare circumstances where teams begin to physically relocate each other because they're blocking each other's buckets, and there might be somebody who's blocking and somebody else starts to push them out of the way. It's fantastic information for the team around for the debrief, but it also has a safety implication. So it's important that if an activity looks like it's escalating, that you make the decision to not end it, but to stop it, help them understand what's going on in their behavior, and see if you can use some facilitation techniques to pull them back towards some level of understanding they might be missing a layer of competition. In that, yes, there is potentially competition between these subgroups, but they're also competing against truly the clock and a larger score as well. And teams that make that mental shift drop the aggressive behaviors and point towards more collaboration. It's up to you to layer in and figure out where and when you feel comfortable, but if there's any safety concerns, that's vital to stop the activity and be able to regroup and go from there. So that's our video overview of On Target.